Hi, welcome listeners to this another episode of podcast on mindfulness. And I'm your host and your friend Manish Behl, founder of Science Center and Mindfulness India Summit. World is becoming more and more challenging with every passing day. There are things which are more complex and difficult. Even though there are so many new inventions and so many things, but still we are dealing with it. Today, we have with us my good friend, Dr. Ronald Siegel. Welcome, Dr. Ron. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Just giving you, Doctor, about your introduction. You are a well-known professor of psychology from Harvard Medical School and have taught there for 35 years. And you yourself is a long-term meditation student. I want to ask you, as a psychologist, what made you so interested in a subject like mindfulness?
Well, it was actually the being a somewhat neurotic and anxious young man is what made me interested in mindfulness. I got into this initially before I became a psychologist, simply to work with my own heart and mind. And it was to work with noticing how often I was, stressed out or struggling with one emotion or another. And yet I had the awareness, even as a young man, that the reactions were out of proportion to the actual dangers in my life. I would be responding as though I were an animal that was under threat when I really wasn't under threat. It was just symbolic threat. So I was drawn to this initially just for my own sanity. And it was actually my mindfulness practice in many ways that led me to become a psychologist, because I thought, well, this is powerful and transformative, and I should learn more about, how to work and help with people more broadly.
Wonderful. I find when I started my journey on mindfulness, the first interest people thought about that mindfulness is very interesting. Something dramatic will open, some new experiences will happen during meditation. You will have some revelation, some new things you will see. Your interest also was a revelation or finding yourself, or something dramatic shift you were expecting out of mindfulness.
Well, I don't know that I was expecting it so much, but I did start to experience some shifts early on. What was most impressive to me was I was actually seeing trees, tasting food, being able to enjoy and have gratitude for very simple moments in my life. So it was paradoxical, because in a sense, it was transformative, but all that was happening was waking up to the ordinary moments of my life. But I also began to be to have some shifts in my understandings of things, because my mindfulness practice, when I got involved in mindfulness practices, I was also beginning to get interested in Buddhist psychology, and really in the awareness that external circumstances weren't really going to bring me a sense of lasting happiness. I began to get the awareness, even as a young man, that I can have good fortune, but it's always followed by disappointment and bad fortune. And it was, well-being was going to have more to do with how I work with my mind than whether I win or lose at the various games of life.
Very interesting. A lot of people today are looking to mindfulness as a tool for performance and creativity, and maybe excelling in their own life or finding success or earning money. What's your message to them?
Well, mindfulness does help us be more effective, right? We can focus better. We can actually sometimes get out of our own way, because we're less preoccupied with what's everybody going to think of us, and am I being a success or not? And we can actually focus on the task at hand. So it can help us to succeed in all sorts of endeavors, from athletics to business to art, whatever we might be doing. However, mindfulness practices also, if we take them seriously enough, they lead to a shift in how we think about ourselves, how we think about our relationships with other people, and what we think of as important in life. Because we do start to notice that almost all of the ways in which we might win at the game of life, all the ways in which we might be successful, have a way of not being that enduring. And this is really for two reasons. One is our yardstick changes, right? So that, there was a time, I don't know if children play with this in India. I know they do in Europe and in America, these toys in which there are multicolored rings, kind of like donuts, in different size. And the idea is to put them on a pole and you create a cone,
quite a
right?
common toy with the kids all over the world.
Okay. And you get it right. And it's like, wow, look, mommy and daddy, I did it. And there's a great feeling of pride and success and achievement. However, at this stage in our lives, it doesn't quite do it in the same way. And so many of the things that in our life were once once floated our boat, made us feel good about ourselves, everything from going to the store alone as a child, or later in life, graduating from various levels of schools, or having a first boyfriend or girlfriend, or even getting married and having children, or having success in a career. All of these things, after a while, we tend to habituate to them, and we need the next level. Just a little story about this. I train psychotherapists a lot, and psychotherapists worked hard for a terminal degree of some sort that allowed them to practice, often a doctoral degree. And in the moment of earning that, wow, that was great. They felt really, really good about themselves. It really felt like a wonderful success. And I asked the group, how many of you woke up this morning feeling fulfilled and good about yourself because you have your terminal degree? And, everybody starts laughing, except sometimes there's like one person in the audience who's like a newly minted therapist, and they say, why is everybody laughing, right? It's because we habituate to these things. And on top of that, what goes up goes down. Even if we're an Olympic athlete and we're at the top of our game, we actually win the gold, what are the chances of winning it in 4 years or in 8 years? So mindfulness practices, yes, they help us to succeed, but they also help us to begin to have perspective on success and see what it can bring us, but also see the limitations for sustainable well-being.
Yeah. Oh, very rightly said that, it's a very small thing, very ordinary thing, but it's still very extraordinary, I think. And that's why you have written, after writing so many books, and that's what the title for your new book is, that the extraordinary gift of being ordinary. I think that's an interesting book, what you have written. Would you like to put some light on your book, what it all has?
Sure. Well, the book actually began as something of a personal journey. There I was already in my 60s, and I had spent decades, literally, 40 years or so doing mindfulness practices, and decades as a clinical psychologist. And you would think that by the end of that time, I would have established something called a secure and stable sense of self. In other words, some sense of feeling about myself that wasn't going up and down, right, with with good fortune and bad fortune. But to be honest, and mindfulness practices do help us to be honest, because we notice what we're feeling inside, hadn't happened, right? I would still react with joy when I was invited to some interesting conference to speak, because I do that kind of thing. I do a lot of writing and teaching, or when people would tell me that they loved a book that I had written, and with disappointment when I felt left out or felt like I hadn't done a great job, or hadn't been successful at something. I'm thinking, gosh, this is still going on up and down at this stage of my life. And, my first hypothesis was, well, maybe I'm just inadequate. Maybe there's something wrong with me. That's why this is happening. Or perhaps some disappointments in childhood, I've never quite worked them through. But then I looked around at my caseload. I still practice and see clients or patients, and almost all of them were going up and down with this. And I looked around at my peers, and almost all of them were going up and down. I realized something's going on here that requires our attention, because so much of our suffering actually comes from this, that we're either feeling stressed out, trying to prove ourselves, trying to stay ahead, trying to accomplish things to feel good about ourselves, or we're feeling inadequate. We're feeling like, oh, somehow I didn't make the mark, somehow I failed. So the inspiration for the book was really, can we do better than this? Can we figure out why is this happening to us, and what might be more sustainable pathways to well-being than just winning at whatever the game happens to be of the moment. And interestingly, one of the things I discovered in looking into this is that for some people, it would be external success. That's what would be making them go up or down. The business is doing well, the business is not doing well. People are respecting me, they like me. People don't seem to be respecting and liking me. For other people, it would be an inner process. They would be comparing themselves not to others out there, but they would be comparing themselves to some inner image of who I should be. Well, I am a good person today because I'm sufficiently kind or generous. I'm not a good person today because I'm not sufficiently kind or generous. So it became very interesting to me to look at all the different forms that this kind of self-judgment and self-evaluation takes, all the different kinds of suffering it creates, and what are some of the pathways out of this?
Wonderful. I think that would be very interesting to read all about behavioral, because I think all of us goes through this journey that one day we are high, we feel that we have it all, we have done it, we reached it. And the next very moment we feel we have nothing, like I don't have this and I don't have that. And this self-referential thinking just kicks in. And then, you are brooding and you are sulking about what you have not achieved or what the others have more than you probably. And I feel today's environment is also pushing. The social media is pushing that more. They put the parcel in front of you like, oh, these guys are enjoying in this holidays. Or Ron is having a great time in Spain. Why I'm not in Spain, probably.
Yeah, no, totally. Nobody sees an Instagram post or a Facebook post that says, woke up this morning, had diarrhea again, anxious that my boss is going to give me a bad review at work, and my girlfriend or boyfriend is going to leave me. No, it's always exactly as you described. Here I am in this fantastic place with fantastic people doing beautiful things, and you're not included. That's what we see on social media. And oh my gosh, it tortures people. I mean, particularly my heart goes out to young people. I don't know what your experience was as a teenager, but for me, I had friends, but there were times where I was alone on a Saturday night or home with my parents and wondering what the other kids were doing. And now to be able to see what the other kids are doing, and especially the feelings of being left out, which are inevitable for everybody, even the popular kids. Oh my, what a torture it is. And on top of this, we start getting addicted to having followers on social media, to getting likes on social media. This was Mark Zuckerberg when he invented Facebook. This was his genius, noticing that, I mean, it's a kind of evil genius, but still genius, noticing that people will become totally addicted to getting likes. And neuroscientists now like to wire people up and put them in functional MRI scanners, which are basically an MRI that takes video. And indeed, every time somebody gets a like on a simulated Instagram or Facebook platform, they experience this squirt of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, which is the part of the brain that's our reward center. And it's the exact same place where you get the squirt of dopamine if you win at gambling, if you've succeeded in some other way. And frankly, it's the same area that's stimulated by cocaine and a lot of other substances. And it is very, very addictive.
Yeah, no, I can see how these days, not the people from any particular social strata or financial background or economic background. I think this disease is rampant, irrespective of the strata or a country or a place or educational background or financial background or economic state. I think it's rampant because, especially in India, I see every kid has a phone, every individual has a phone, every taxi driver has a phone, every MD has a phone. So I think it's across the board people have, and I see people are lost in these phones, and I don't know what they are digging in this, but our heads are down and we are just constantly observing something happening and smiling at ourselves and then crying ourselves. And, and this I feel somehow a zombiness which I see in people. I observe we just become like a zombie. We constantly watching. We don't know where are we at that mental state? Are we at that place where the others are seeing, or we're like a monkey? We are just scrolling from one to another. What's happening, Ron, at that time to the brain?
Yeah, we are like a monkey scrolling. Yeah, you described that perfectly. And no, we're not at all present to what's happening interpersonally, nor are we present to the natural environment around us. And part of the tragedy of this is when we look at what are more sustainable pathways to well-being, it's things like being connected to other people, not just connected in terms of looking for self-esteem boosts, looking for likes, but connected in honest conversation with other people. And the other thing, which is highly sustainable, is connecting to the natural world, when we can actually appreciate the beauty of a plant, the magic of another animal, the sunrise, the sunset. Those are the kinds of things that are sustainable. And in fact, mindfulness practices can help us to notice those things and appreciate them. But it's hard to do when we're mostly addicted to looking for self-esteem boosts on our device, looking for, who has responded to me? Oh, is my team winning? Because it's so interesting around this sort of self-evaluation game. Sometimes it's just, oh yeah, I'm a fan of this team, and if this team wins, I feel like, hey, I'm successful now. And so we become terribly, terribly addicted to this. And in the same way that when we're addicted to intoxicating substances, that takes us away from engagement in life. This takes us away from engagement in life.
I was reading your book, and a lot of saw a lot of points you were mentioned about distraction. But I want to ask you, why are we genetically to be distracted all the time? Why this distraction is so easy to catch on to us rather than a focus?
Yeah, well, this particular form of distraction, this concern with proving ourselves and trying to feel good about ourselves, this goes back very, very, very far. If we were to go on a so-called safari in the African savannah, which is basically riding around in a Jeep with a naturalist, the naturalist would point out in species after species, look, over there's the dominant male surrounded by literally a harem of reproductively promising females. And then over in the next field, there's another group of males, usually a bit younger, doing the species-specific equivalent of practicing football or something, trying to develop the skills to become dominant. And it's like, why does this matter? Why would it matter to be the dominant animal in so many of these different groups? And the reason it matters is because the dominant animal got to pass on their DNA. And the way natural selection works, the way evolution evolves our brains, is that anything that perpetuates our DNA, that allows us to reproduce and allows our offspring to survive and reproduce themselves, well, that's what stays in the gene pool. So we might imagine going back onto, ancient hominids, before humans on the African savannah, we might imagine that there were some, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, being very cooperative, not being concerned with social rank or dominance or any of this. But they didn't tend to reproduce as much as the ones who were fighting to be on the top. So we've got these genes that make us always interested in what's our social rank? How do we compare to the other primates in our troop, meaning the other humans that are around us? And the tragedy is that this tendency to compare ourselves to others shows up in our hearts and minds with this fluctuating self-esteem that you described so brilliantly, how sometimes we're feeling like we're the greatest thing ever, and sometimes we're feeling really inadequate. And it really doesn't matter where we are on the social hierarchy. I mean, this can happen to, among world leaders feeling good about themselves or bad about themselves, as well as it can, happen to somebody who's just trying to survive and get enough money to feed themselves or their family. And it's the reason why it grips us so much is because our brains evolved to be concerned with this, and that's why this particular form of distraction, right? This distraction, which is about, desperately looking for something to help me feel good about myself. That's why that's so powerful. And sadly, it takes us out of being able to actually enjoy and appreciate simple, ordinary moments in our lives that aren't about, getting likes. They're not about high achievement. They're not about anything that separates us or helps us to improve our position, vis-a-vis other people. They're just about appreciating what is here and now. And those turn out to be very ordinary moments.
Yeah. Very interesting, I think, Ron, how you have put the sauna example. I feel, the validation is kind of our social acceptance, that I'm as socially accepted. So look for constant validation from your own society, your own kind, your own family. I think it's our social need to get validation. And probably there is some mix of validation also comes in that, am I accepted in society? Is my thought process has been well accepted, and when I get this validation, I get the satisfaction, probably. But I like how you are saying evolution has shaped our brain to focus on survival probably more than having a fulfillment or satisfaction. I think that
Absolutely.
doesn't come in. And is it
Absolutely.
right to change now?
Well, luckily, we also have other instincts that we can help to encourage and cultivate, because we don't only have this competitive instinct, the instinct for how do I compare to others. We also have instincts toward cooperation and nurturing one another. I mean, we certainly see this when we have children, right? Those of us who have had children, the urge to care for our child, it's not like somebody has to tell us, you got to care for your child. It's quite powerful, right? We wish for their well-being, and in fact, the same is true for our partners and our friends. We have the capacity for love, for compassion, and for the wisdom of seeing that other people's well-being and my well-being are quite tied with one another. The problem is that this instinct is often overwhelmed by the instinct of getting ahead and proving ourselves and being basically being a high-ranking primate in our primate troop. So to cultivate those other instincts, we have to actually put in some effort. And this is really where mindfulness practice comes in. Mindfulness practice turns out to be a wonderful tool for shifting out of a self-evaluation framework where we're always thinking about how we're doing, toward a framework of cooperation and in particular connection. Because when we feel safely connected to another person, this preoccupation with how I'm doing starts to drop.
Wow.
Like you and I are having this conversation right now, and simply having the experience of, oh, you feel it too? You also know what it's like to have this up and down? That gives me a sense of, that's kind of a relief. We can be friends in this. We can connect around the shared experience. And when we make a connection, and we see this particularly, whenever we're in a conversation with a good friend where we're really able to be honest with one another, all the judgments, they start to settle, and we go from being a me and a you to being a we for the moment. And as a we, there's warmth, there's connection, and there's a whole other form of well-being that's not about getting the likes on social media, and that allows us to be present. And actually, mindfulness practices can help us do that in a lot of different ways, and we can talk about those if you
Wonderful.
like.
I think I like how you connected mindfulness with the being connected to each other, and that's also a form of a mindfulness. A lot of people understand mindfulness probably as one of a meditation. And there are various ways, like you are saying, that mindfulness it's not only by sitting in a meditative pose is what you're getting mindfulness, but it's all around us constantly. We need to be aware. One thing which comes to me while these dominant thoughts in us, do we have any control over thoughts? Because these are very dominant things. When I feel that I don't have it, then these thoughts are so powerful that I have no control over them.
Yeah, so many of us think, gosh, okay, I can't control the weather. I can't control the world economy. I can't control whether countries go to war with one another, but I should at least be able to control my thoughts, right? Well, it's rather disappointing to notice that no, we can't really control our thoughts so much. We can cultivate certain thoughts. In other words, we can, for example, there's loving kindness practice, right? Which is one of the practices that's often done broadly under the umbrella of mindfulness practices. And that does cultivate a sense of warmth, a sense of love and care toward others and toward ourselves. So we can kind of cultivate that, but it's not a tight control, right? We can be in the middle of loving kindness practice and immediately be hit with, jealousy, immediately be hit with a wave of annoyance for somebody that we feel wasn't fair to us, immediately be hit with a wave of desire or even greed. I want what the other person has. So it's not tight control. We can gradually try to steer the ship of the mind in a certain direction, but oh gosh, we don't have control. And one of the things that one of the gifts of mindfulness practices is mindfulness practice can help us to accept all these different thoughts and to develop what cognitive scientists call a metacognitive awareness, which is a fancy term for seeing thoughts as thoughts rather than believing in each of our thoughts. So that in terms of the ups and downs that we've been talking about, when I have the thought that says, oh yeah, I'm so smart, I'm the smartest kid in the class, look at what I've done, metacognitive awareness lets me see, oh yeah, there's one of those self-esteem high thoughts. They come and go. Or conversely, when I have the thought, oh, I'm no good, my colleagues are doing a much better job than I am, if only I didn't have my anxieties, I would be more successful. When we're going down that path, to also notice, oh, those are my depressive thoughts, those are my self-critical thoughts. Because the simple act in mindfulness practice of bringing our attention back over and over to a sensory object, whether it be the breath or listening to sounds or, the feet on the ground with walking meditation, that very simple practice helps us to start not just living in the thought stream, but to actually see thoughts as thoughts. And that gives us a little bit of freedom. So, and there's been a whole movement in psychology. Probably many of our listeners are aware of cognitive behavior therapy, which is a major school of psychology worldwide. Cognitive behavior therapy used to be about trying to control thoughts. Okay, how can I change my irrational, maladaptive thoughts that cause suffering into rational ones that are going to make me happier? And the whole field has shifted really after the encounter over the last couple of decades with mindfulness practice. And the field has shifted to, how can I see all thoughts as coming and going and notice that all my thoughts are colored by my emotion of the moment? And I shouldn't take any of them too seriously because they're going to keep changing, exactly as you described before. One moment I'm the greatest thing ever. At the next moment, I'm feeling like I failed.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I was reading your book. You very well explained the metacognitive awareness. In fact, for people to understand awareness itself is a difficult aspect because we do not understand awareness. We feel if the awareness, do I have awareness? And if there is awareness, where this rests in me? If I'm seeing things, I'm feeling where this awareness is resting in me. And now on top of it, we talk about metacognitive awareness, which is an additional lens which we are seeing things with. Isn't that overwhelming for people to understand that, something like that?
Well, I think when we get into the question of what is consciousness or what is awareness, yeah, that's a realm that philosophers have struggled with for a long time. And when we do mindfulness practice and we say, so where is this I inside that I keep talking about, right? I'm hungry, I want this, I feel good about myself. When we go inside and we actually try to find that I, it's elusive. We can't exactly find it. And that gets very interesting. It's potentially freeing, but I agree, it can be confusing. But the sense of simply noticing when we have a thought, simply noticing that our thoughts change with our moods, that to me is a little bit more accessible. Think of the last time that you or I were down in the dumps, we're feeling discouraged in some way. And what were our thoughts like then? What did we think about ourselves back then? And then think of the last time when we were feeling pretty good about ourselves, and what were those thoughts like? And we realize, oh yeah, there really are rather different thoughts in these different emotional states. And really, that's all that metacognitive awareness is about, is simply noticing, oh yeah, they change based on our mood, and therefore they're a bit unreliable. So the next time we're in either kind, we can have a little perspective on it. I have a friend and colleague. He's actually a couples therapist named Terry Reel, and this, of course, the going up and down can create all sorts of problems in our intimate relationships, right? That our partner says something that makes us feel, maybe we hurt our partner's feelings by accident, as men, we tend to do this with some regularity, and they're hurt and they're kind of annoyed at us for that. And for me anyway, I start to feel ashamed that I wasn't more sensitive, that I wasn't more attuned. But then I get defensive because I don't like to feel ashamed. And in this whole process, if I can notice that, oh yeah, this is my worrying about feeling ashamed, that's what's going on here, then maybe instead of defending myself, I have the flexibility to say, oh, I'm sorry, I get it, I see that. So the sort of seeing thoughts more clearly also gives us this flexibility to not just get caught in defending one position or another position.
I think that's a very good way of people to understand this flexibility of not getting rigid with what you are thinking. And these, I am my thoughts, probably just seeing the thoughts as a passing cloud or something which is happening in your conscious awareness, that, something is happening and I am not my thought. This angry person is not me, probably. This is one of a thought, and observe it and let it pass. I think that's a fair thought, and people can, I think, easily do that. Well, talking about it, Ron, I'm seeing that we are reading also these days that the mental health issues have dramatically increased in past 10, 20 years. What do you think as a psychologist, when you are seeing for last 40 years, that is there a shift happening? The number of people about mental health issues are coming more or less, and what's happening exactly?
Yeah, no, it's getting worse worldwide. I mean, the pandemic made it worse because people were both anxious about what's going to happen in their world and in their life, because it was really quite a disruption for people worldwide, and it also tended to isolate people from one another. And one of the findings, one of the reasons why it's so helpful to get out of the whole, to soften the self-esteem roller coaster, is because when we feel connected to other people, that's very good for our psychological health as well as for our physical health. I actually have a friend and colleague who's unusual. He wears a number of hats. He's a professor in Harvard Medical School. He's a psychiatrist, so he's a medical doctor who works with mental health issues. He's a psychoanalyst, so who's trained in the Freudian system of psychoanalysis. And he's also a Zen priest. So he's been very involved in meditation practice in the Zen tradition. And he's the director of what's called the Harvard Study on Adult Development, which is the longest running longitudinal study of human well-being. It started with some 700 men back in 1938. And it is still going on. And they've been interviewing these men and then eventually interviewing their families, and really looking carefully at what are the building blocks of a good life of well-being, and what are the things that get in the way of a good life, both in terms of physical health and longevity, but particularly in terms of psychological well-being. And my friend's name is Bob Waldinger. You can look up, he's got a lovely TED talk about this. And he says, the jury is in, we now know. And the answer is, it's the quality of our relationships. When we have good relationships, well, we tend to live a good life. When we don't tend to live a good life. And lest this worry any of us, the relationships don't have to be perfectly harmonious, right? We don't have to always be in sync with one another. We can argue, we can differ, but we have to feel that we trust one another. And our friends, our partner, whoever it is, would be there for us if we had real difficulty in our lives. And this becomes, it turns out that this is a central building block for well-being. So understanding that means that we can start, we can actually direct our attention toward doing what we can to foster safe relationships. And a lot of that involves, it's so interesting. There's a kind of recursive loop, if you will, between, on the one hand, becoming less preoccupied with how am I doing and trying to achieve and keeping our self-esteem afloat, and these connected relationships. Because as we were talking before, when we're in these connected relationships, we're less preoccupied with how we're doing, right? Because we feel like we're part of a we rather than a me and a you in some way competing with one another. And so when we're connected, we feel less preoccupied. But if we can get over ourselves in terms of the self-esteem stuff, it makes it easier to be connected. Because if we think about our relationships at work, or even our relationships in the family, so often when we have conflicts, it's because one person has made another person feel inadequate or feel bad about themselves. Or somebody at work, what's the biggest problem that happens in organizations? Instead of everybody rowing together for the same goal, one person is competing with another person about who's getting the recognition, whose idea was it, who does the boss respect? And that actually gets in the way of us being productive together, right? So there's this really interesting relationship, and they really go together. Connecting with other people is a powerful antidote to being preoccupied with how we're doing and our self-esteem. And as we relax our preoccupation with self-esteem, we can connect better with other people. It actually led me, if I just to finish this line of thought, to come up with a very simple phrase, which is very, very powerful. People have found this very, very useful. It's simply, make a connection, not an impression. And to just think about that as we go through our day, whether it could be we're talking to our boss, what would it be like to make a connection instead of an impression? We're talking to we're meeting the people who are going to be our future in-laws, right? The parents of somebody that our son or daughter has fallen in love with. What would it be like to make a connection, not an impression? And this can extend throughout our whole day, and it becomes a very interesting form of mindfulness practice. Like, okay, what if I use mindful, be aware of what's happening to tune into what feels like it makes a connection.
So important, I think, make a connection instead of impression. Most of the time our life is just spent in making impression on others. How I look, how do I say. I think life just passes like that only, and instead of making connection properly, we don't somehow we have felt that the families and individuals are getting too much nuclear. We are living in a very nuclear world. Earlier, there were large families, there were 5 brothers living together and their children living together. Now that's no more a case. Everybody is looking after their own small nuclear families. And I think that's also causing a lot of mental issue, because there's nobody to look after somebody's back, and we don't feel connected.
I'm really glad you brought it back to that, and your original question of, are mental health problems getting worse? Because being connected is the antidote to so many mental health problems. The fact that we're getting less connected absolutely is making it worse. That's one of the reasons it was worse during the pandemic, but it's worse in general. There's a very famous book, and it's now a couple of decades old, called Bowling Alone, because in America, one of the ways in which ordinary working people would connect with one another would be through the sport of bowling, because you hang out together. It's not like a game of baseball exactly. You're a lot of time to talk, a lot of time to connect. And Bowling Alone was about just the breakdown of community organizations, the breakdown of extended families, the breakdown of so many things that used to give us natural connection. And I think it's still better in India than it is in America. I mean, America is a very individualistic culture where I think families have been broken apart for a longer period of time, but worldwide we continue to trend in this direction, and it's not a good trend.
Why India is, I think, on the world over, looks at America or US as a leader in because you have so much wealth, success, and comfort, and bigger cars, and bigger washers, and bigger houses probably. So the social behavior is also mimicked around in the world. Like if they are living in a nuclear family, probably we should also do that. And this joint family culture is somehow taking a backseat. Still in a smaller towns, still it is practice, and we see less mental health issues in those cities or small towns. But in the big towns or big cities, we are so isolated where we don't know who is living next door. We don't know who is living in a next apartment unless until something happens in their home, or there's a fire, or there is something happen and the guy coming knocking your door. Hello, do you have a water? You have something? I have a fire at my home. And I say, okay, Do you live next door? Yeah. I'm living here for 2 years. So this is
Yeah,
like,
no, it is an enormous problem, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the same way that almost the whole world bought into McDonald's, right? Thinking that, oh, that's American, this must be good food, and you can get a good salad there sometimes now, but basically, you want to compare traditional Indian food to McDonald's, don't go to McDonald's. That's completely insane, right? But people do it, and sadly, imitating this idea of more individual wealth and more individual separation is going to be a pathway to well-being. It's simply not true. I mean, that's what we see from that Harvard study, which is really it's a solid scientific study. No, that is not the direction we want to be moving in. We do not want to be moving toward more individualism. We want to be moving toward how can we connect and cooperate with one another, because that is a much more sustainable pathway to well-being.
I think so important point, and I have so much to learn from you, Ron, on this point. Interconnectedness, and people do not value it, and especially now. I remember I started working in my early years in 90s when I joined an organization. I came from a small town, and my organization said, "Listen, this is a big city and this is a big organization. Keep your emotions and yourself outside of organization. Here you come and work." And I felt then, and this was dictated to me for a very long time, that, keep your emotions and feelings and everything outside, and your own personal interest outside. And I used to think, how can I do that? Because that's who I am. But, that's why we became ruthless. We became uncompassionate towards others. We have no empathy for our fellow people who are working with us, neither for our clients. And, this is a culture which is very commonly done. What do you think, as a leaders, practice of mindfulness is important? Because, we follow all the leaders. What leaders do, we follow. What do you think leaders should practice, and what practice they should do?
Well, I think, mindfulness practices, one of their benefits is they help us to attune to the more subtle things that are happening in the heart and the mind. And it takes sensitivity to notice our effects on others. It takes sensitivity to notice that the person in the next cubicle is sad this morning, and I wonder what's happening there with them, to have empathy, to begin to notice other people's experience. So any kind of mindfulness practices that help us to attune to what's happening inside, even a standard practice like just following the breath and paying attention to it and coming back to the breath when thoughts go elsewhere, can help us to notice what's happening inside emotionally. Part of what we need is simply to value that, to notice that, okay, in any interaction that we have with another human being, that interaction can happen on what we might call a relational level or an executive functioning level. On the executive functioning level, it's these are the tasks to do. Let's prioritize our objectives here and leave with an action plan. We're going to do this, 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 and this. Certainly a role for that in virtually any organization for getting things done. On the relational level, it's how did this interaction between us feel? Did it leave us feeling connected? Was one of us trying to impress the other? Was one of us dominating over the other and making the other one feel inadequate, feel not good enough, feel like they're not fit to be part of the team? Because as it turns out, when things are not going well on the relational level, we can come up with a great action plan, but people aren't going to perform well. And people are not going to be happy. They're going to be miserable. And what people are going to do when they feel miserable is, so often they're going to look for some kind of self-esteem boost to feel better about themselves. And that's going to just trap them even more in this kind of thing. And we won't be working as a team. So I think sensitizing ourselves with mindfulness practices to what's happening in the heart and mind, and using that to be thinking in each interaction, how are we doing in terms of connecting? Does this feel like we're understanding one another? Does this feel like we're respecting one another? Does this person feel basically that I'm being kind toward them? Or even if I can say this we don't talk about this in business or professional communities, does this person feel love from me in this interaction? what if we attune to that as well as the executive tasks that we're dealing with? And that changes everything. It absolutely changes everything when we're able to do that. So that's certainly one way to use the mindfulness practice. Another way to use it is to monitor our own ups and downs so that we can see when we're trying to make ourselves feel good about ourselves by building ourselves up, which is almost always at someone else's expense, right? To come back to this whole issue of self-esteem and self-evaluation. Let's say I've spent my whole life trying to feel good about myself, trying to feel that I'm intelligent, and I was good at school and that kind of thing. So that I was not very good at sports. So yeah, I put my energy into that, right? That was my building block for self-esteem a lot. But if I'm going to think of myself as intelligent, implicitly, I'm making a comparison to other people that I'm thinking are less intelligent, right? So there is a comparative element to it. And that's true if you like to think of yourself as kind or generous. You're comparing yourself to other people that you imagine are less kind or generous, or an inner image of what a kind and generous person should be, or physically attractive, or likable, or funny, whatever it is. It's always based on these kinds of comparisons. So if I can use my mindfulness practice to notice, okay, am I doing stuff to try to build myself up, which is going to make the other person feel less than in some way? And we sense this, right? When we're with another person who's doing this, and we all do it, but when we're with another person who's doing it a lot, we start getting activated ourselves, right? We start feeling, oh, I don't feel so good about myself because this other person is in essence showing off in some way how successful they are, or how good they are, or whatever it is. So we can use our mindfulness practice to tune into this and just sort of seeing how this is happening moment to moment. And that can help us shift into making a connection with the other person, being on the relational level, not just the executive functioning level all the time. So I actually think that's one of the wonderful gifts we can get from mindfulness practice if we point our attention in this direction.
Very rightly said. In a compassion, I remember a quote by His Holiness Dalai Lama. He says, in a compassionate heart in this difficult world is a strength, not the weakness. And
absolutely.
And I feel that, as a leader, one has to be compassionate. But earlier, it used to be seen compassion as a weakness. And I remember I was doing one intervention with top leaders, and one of a guy came and I went, what are you trying to teach us? Being compassionate? You think you want to make us weak? You want to make us meek? I think. And I told him, I think compassion is a strength,
Yeah.
Hiding it somewhere and showing it somewhere else and then projecting yourself stronger, I think that would be a weakness or meekness, probably what you would be expecting. But compassion is like a big strength.
Absolutely. There's a metaphor that comes from Japan. I believe it exists in other cultures too, but the Japanese version is this, which is stronger, a mighty oak tree or a reed of bamboo? And the answer is the reed of bamboo, because when the monsoon comes, the oak tree starts losing branches, right? It breaks. The bamboo goes over in just a small breeze, but it comes back up. It's flexible in this way. And when we are open-hearted, that's how it feels, right? We're with another person and we feel empathy for them. We feel compassion. We're moved by their experience. We come back up. We may feel sad with them. We may feel tender with them. We come back up. We can function. We can do things in the world. But so many of us, and I think this befalls men worse than women in general in the world. So many of us, we're taught not to cry in some way. I mean, when I'm working with men clinically, I often ask, so when was the last time you cried? And I don't know what this is like in Indian culture, but in American culture, guys have trouble remembering. And then I'll ask, well, do you imagine that you cried when you were a baby? Well, yeah, all babies cry. But do you imagine you cried when you were a little boy? Yeah, I think all little boys cry. When did you learn not to? When did you learn to shut down on this whole realm of human experience? And most of us learned sometime, whether it was on the athletic field, in elementary school, or maybe not till puberty, but at some point we learned, don't do that. You're going to look weak.
Yeah.
And yet, if we're going to be compassionate, if we're going to actually understand other people's feeling experience, we have to be comfortable with our own. We have to be comfortable with our own tenderness, our own sadness, our own vulnerability, because that's what allows us to recognize it in another. And that's what allows us to offer a hand to the other person who's suffering. So, and this is how mindfulness and compassion practices so go hand in hand. Mindfulness could be translated as heartfulness, as this ability to be emotionally present to both the full range of our own feelings, but also to the feelings of others. And that's a very useful tool if we're going to make a connection rather than an impression in the world.
Yeah, no, very rightly said. Most of us don't understand the simple value and power of compassion. People are interested in instant happiness, gratification, earning more money, controlling people, controlling organization. And, they find happiness something in controlling others. Or probably, we've seen in past and harming others, killing others. We find a lot of satisfaction. We feel a lot of strength. And probably people keep surfing. I've seen people surfing wars, and they're just killing. And so we find that, that something is gone wrong somewhere, like you said in process, that when did you stop crying? When did you feel that, it's we crying? So probably we are projecting something else who we are not. And we are running after something else, which I don't think so gives us satisfaction.
Yeah. And I mean, part of the problem is, when we're going after these self-esteem boosts, when we're going after these victories that make us feel better than others in whatever realm, they're addictive, right? The same way the likes create this little squirt of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. When our business is sold for a lot of money, yes, there's an enormous squirt in the nucleus accumbens. The problem is, like all addictions, it feels good in the short run, but bad in the long run. And we become very short-sighted as human beings. And what happens is, so we feel really good. We've had some success. We've had some victory in some arena. And then it starts to wear off because we habituate to it. We become accustomed to it, or simply what goes up goes down, right? The value of stock goes up, the value of stock goes down, things change. And then we start to have the bad feeling, and we immediately think, okay, how do I get the good feeling back? It must be with another victory. Let me have some other achievement. And we do, and we feel good for a little while, and then that fades. And so, like all addictions, the cocaine wears off, you need more cocaine. Yeah. The sense of victory wears off, you need more victories. And we can spend an entire lifetime doing this. There's a student of the world's religions and mythology at Columbia University in New York, very famous professor, and named Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell said, most people climb the ladder of success only to discover that it is leaning against the wrong wall. It's because this works, but it's ultimately leaning against the wrong wall. And this isn't to say that to be successful, to create a company that provides services in the world is a bad thing. No, that's a wonderful thing. To be successful as a psychologist, to write books and have people read them, it's a wonderful thing. It's doing something useful in the world. But much hinges on what our main motivation is. If our main motivation is, let me try to sustain this good feeling about myself and keep this up going, and get another basically hit of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, that's not going to be nearly so sustainable. If my main goal is, how can I be useful to the world? How can I be useful to other people? How can I keep my heart open so I remain connected to others, so I get the good feeling of being a we rather than a me, and I don't need these boosts, and I simply naturally do these things, even if they're world-changing things. I'm not doing them to aggrandize myself. I'm doing them because they're useful to do, and I see the benefit they have for others. And yes, others appreciate me for that. That's wonderful. I can take in that love. I can take in that appreciation, but I'm not always proving myself.
Yeah, that's true. I think, Ron, what you have done, I was reading one book, and you have a wonderful exercise in your book. What exercise would you suggest for somebody who understands this, but still unable to change?
Well, one that I like, and it's toward the beginning of the book, is to simply spend a few moments looking at what energizes us, what we've gotten hooked on ourselves for self-esteem. And we can do a very brief version of this because I know that we're near the end of our time. So let's just do this together. Let's close our eyes. Please don't do this if you're driving a car or something right now, but if you can close your eyes and you're comfortable doing that, close your eyes for a moment. And just take a breath or two. And I'm just going to name a few of the building blocks of self-esteem that we as humans tend to rely on. And just notice if any of these has ever been relevant to you, if you've ever had feelings about feeling good about yourself or not so good about yourself based on each of these attributes or human abilities or criteria. Let's start with skills and talents. Who's smarter? Am I smart enough? Or who's more educated? Am I educated enough? You ever felt good about yourself or bad about yourself in this realm? Am I creative enough? Talented enough? Do I have good taste? Or how am I at sports? You ever feel good or bad about yourself based on how you were in an athletic event? Or accomplishments? Who earns money? Do I earn enough? Who earns more money? Do I earn enough? Am I respected enough? Do others get more respect? If you have children, who has the better looking, better behaved, or more successful children? Are my kids doing well enough? If you have a partner, who has the better behaved, better looking, or more successful partner? Is my partner good enough? Am I successful enough at work? And then there are the groups we're part of. Do I come from a good enough family? Did I go to a good enough university? Who has more friends or is more popular? Am I popular enough? Have you ever had feelings about being part of the in crowd or not? Or getting attention? Do I get enough attention? Do people pay enough attention to me? Or your identity, the group you're part of, how do you feel about your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your nationality, or your sexual orientation? Are you proud of those? Ever feel ashamed or not so good about those? And then in relationships, am I a good enough friend? Am I a good enough parent? Have I been a good enough child, sibling, or co-worker? You ever feel good or bad about yourself for how you are in relationships? Or the degree to which you live by your values? Who's nicer? Am I nice enough? Am I honest enough? Am I as generous as I should be? As caring? As forgiving? Or physical qualities? How do I look? Am I attractive enough? Who's thinner? Am I thin enough? Who's taller? Am I tall enough? Am I just plain sexy enough? Do I look young enough? Or just in general, who's in better shape? Am I fit enough? And among those of us who've been involved in mindfulness practices or psychological or spiritual paths for a long time, even sillier items show up on the list. Who's more enlightened? Who's more aware? Who makes fewer of these social comparisons, is less driven by ego? Am I too preoccupied with myself? And just because we're nearing the end of our time, just take a moment to notice which of those rang a bell for you. And then have the intention to notice as you go through your day, whether you find yourself striving in some way to prove yourself on these areas, feeling good or bad about yourself. And you can even start to inquire, when did I get hooked on each of these? Who told me that this was important? And just watching this carefully can help us to be a little less caught in the self-esteem roller coaster. And we can open our eyes again and come back.
Wonderful. I think this was one of a very good mindfulness exercise I have done in very, very long time. Amazing this was. This really opens up many doors and many windows inside, and you can see many things. You can see your conditioning. You can see many things which in normal your rut you can't see.
Yeah, well, I think we're like fish in water a lot, so we don't notice it because we so react and respond to these things, and so does everybody else, that we don't notice what we're doing. And being mindful of it can help.
Yes, I think amazing practice, Ron. I would request all the listeners to read this book. It has many other exercises, amazing. And this was basically a building blocks of self-esteem. I'm so looking forward to read one more time your book because it has so much of insight and wisdom. And I will definitely read this book again. I will ask all the listeners to please secure your copy and read this book. And it has amazing exercises. And thank you so much, Ron, for joining today for this podcast. We look forward to have a next of the podcast because I have so many other questions for you and we have so little time, and I can continue to chat with you for hours on this discussion on this subject.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for both your thoughtful questions as well as your sharing of your own experience, which I think enriches the conversation for everybody out there.
Thank you so much, and we see you again soon.
Sounds good. Be well.
Yeah, thank you.